Hello, this is Darilys, and in this video I will be presenting my contributions to Virtual Roll Call version 4. In the screen we can see a detailed use case of the entire system. I have highlighted in blue the no contributions that I did to the system overall, no features, and in yellow it's the enhancements to the existing features I made. So if we go over this use case, there was an enhancement to the view categories where we can do view pending document notifications based on the officer's shift. Also for the officers and the entire users of the system, there is a session timeout. Also, the supervisors can view archived watch orders. They can export to Excel existing reports. There was an enhancement to the way we add users since there's a no feature for shift management. So I will go over in more details in the next slides. So some of the user stories that I worked on, the most relevant, was user story 332, which is add shift functionality for officers. User story 343, add folder category security based on officer's shift. Story 347, add site settings for session timeout. 328, automatically log out users after being idle for timeout period. Story 333, show pending documents on supervisor's log. 329, archive watch orders, and 311, set watch order map default position based on longitude and latitude from site settings. If we move to the first user story, story 332, add shift functionality for officers. The description is, as an administrator, I would like to assign officers to a specific shift in the system so I can restrict the access to certain areas of the application based on the officer's shift. The acceptance criteria for this story is that shifts need to be set up before being assigned to the officers through the application settings. Shifts can be updated and deleted at any time. Officers must be assigned to a specific shift, and administrators can change an officer's shift at any time. As part of the sequence diagram, I added a sequence diagram for one of the actions, which is add a shift. So an administrator clicks on the shift management button under the administrator menu. They can populate the shift name from time to time and status, and the admin controller class will receive that information and send a request to the data service with the same fields, which will communicate with the database handler class. In between these two, there is back services for PHP that will call the specific files, and the DB handler will do the required insert into the database. Success messages are sent back, and the admin controller will respond with a view shift function that will retrieve the name, from, to, and the status fields. We can see the screenshots. So under the administrator menu, we'll click on shift management. This is the form where the administrator will fill out the information, shift name, from, to, status, and the add shift button. Once the shift is added, this is the edit shift modal where they can see the current shift in the system with their information. If they click on the edit, they could edit all the fields of the shift, as well as they can delete, and in the same screen. So once the shift is set up, then the administrator can go into the user management and add a new user and the shift will be part of the required fields to create a new user in the system. For story 343, add folder category security based on officer's shift. As an officer, I would like to only see folders that contain information for my current shift. So supervisors and administrators can see all folders or categories. Officers can only see folders for their current shift. When supervisors create folders categories, shift visibility must be assigned to the category. Folder category visibility can be set up for multiple shifts, and category visibility can be updated at any time. The sequence diagram that I chose for this user story is how to add a category. So the administrator clicks on the Manage Categories option, and this profile, it populates the active shifts that are in the system. Then the administrator can specify what is the category name, as well as what shifts will have access to see that category through the admin controller. And the same flow, the admin controller sends the request to the data service sends the request to the debris handler, and at the end, the information is persisted in the database. Success messages are sent back to the admin controller, and the system calls the function view categories and retrieves the name and shifts that have access to that category that they just inserted. So if we go to see how this looks like, so the administrator goes into the document categories to add a new category. So they enter the name and the shift visibility. It could be one or it could be many. So in this next screen, we can see that it could either be all, so that means that the folder that they will create will have access, all officers will have access to this category, or it could be specific ones, or it could be multiple. For example, category AB could be visible by A and B. So this is an example of what the category would look like after it's been created. So under the dashboard, each category will become a folder, and we can later on add documents to that folder. For story 347, add site settings for session timeout. As an administrator, I would like to control the timeout period so that users are kicked out of the system if they're idle for such time. The acceptance criteria for this user story is to add section to site settings to enter the timeout period in minutes. This section is only controlled by administrators. Users that are idle for the number of minutes in the setting should be locked out of the system. So the sequence diagram will be to change the timeout. So the administrator clicks on the site settings option under the administrator login. They will input the session timeout in minutes, and that will go to the admin controller where the business logic is, or the application logic. Then the request is sent to the data service, and the data service reroutes that to the DB handler, which will make the request to the actual database to update the table with the no value. Success responses are provided back, and the system will display the no timeout in the site settings. We can see in the next slide how it looks like. So under the administrator, we have the site settings menu, and there are many options. For example, application name, police department name, and this is the new section created, session timeout. So we'll enter the time in minutes, and as soon as you enter, it will be persisted in the database, and it will populate the current site settings grid with the no value. In this case, is 30. The next story is story 328, automatically log out user after being idle for timeout period. As a user, I would like to be logged out after being idle for timeout period so that my account is protected. The acceptance criteria for this story, after being idle for timeout period, show a pop-up window advising the user that the section will be closed if they don't take action. Users should be able to move the mouse and continue working on site to prevent section from closing, and pop-up window will display on screen for 60 seconds. If the user does not take action during that period of time, the section will terminate. For the session timeout, this is the sequence diagram. We start with the user as an actor, but it could also be a supervisor or an administrator. I chose the officer because it's the lowest level. Supervisor and administrators are generalizations of an officer. So the sequence starts by the user is currently working in the system and interacting with the officer profile class. And the officer profile class sends a request to the share controller for a timeout init function. After this function is initialized, there is a loop that is constantly watching for idle period. And if the officer has been idle for more than the time specified, then the idle start function is triggered, which will populate and will retrieve to the user or the officer profile a warning dialog that will advise the user that there needs to be activity, otherwise the session will be terminated. So once this warning dialog has been triggered, then we have an alternative action where 1, the user did not take action within 60 seconds, or 2, the countdown of 1 minute was interrupted. In the first case, if no action is taken, the logout function will be called at the share controller level, and the user will be redirected to the login page. Otherwise, if the countdown was interrupted, the idle stop function will be called and the loop will repeat again, where the system will be watching for inactivity to start counting for the idle timeout. So this is how it looks. So if the user is being idle for the number of minutes specified in the site settings, a pop-up window will come up saying you're idle, do something, and it displays a countdown of 60 seconds. If the user did not take any actions within the 60 seconds, it will have another window saying that you have been timed out, and it will automatically be redirected to the login page afterwards. For story 333, show pending documents on supervisor's log. As a supervisor, I would like that pending documents are displayed in my log so that I can keep track of who has not reviewed certain documents. The acceptance criteria for this user story is to display pending documents in supervisor's log. Display should follow the same format as reviewed and done documents are currently displayed. The sequence diagram for this user story starts with the supervisor clicking the logs menu under the supervisor profile. It sends a request with get logs to the supervisor controller that goes through the share controller, because not only the supervisor can do it, also the administrator can do it. Then data service receives a call and communicates with the DB handler, and the stored procedure that is stored in the database is executed. Success messages are sent back, and as a result, the grid is populated with the information add the supervisor profile class. This is a visual representation. So the supervisor can click on the logs option and it will populate the name of all the officers with the current documents in the system and the status. So we can see that it's being reviewed, they're also done, and also pending documents. So all the statuses are included in the report. Also, by clicking in this upper right corner icon, we can see that the supervisor has the option to export the report as a CSV file or as a PDF, and also they can customize the columns that are seen in the report by selecting and unselecting through these options right here. For user story 329, archive watch orders. As an administrator, I would like that watch orders which expiration date is in the past are archived so that we can keep historical records of all watch orders. The acceptance criteria for this story: archive watch orders by expiration date. Admins and supervisors should see the archive watch orders in a new tab under Logs in Supervisors and display relevant fields in a grid. So the sequence diagram will look like this. The actor will be the supervisor. That will start the action by clicking the View Archived Watch Orders menu. This will be done through the supervisor profile, which will send a request to the supervisor controller to get the watch orders. The data service will handle the request and will communicate with the database handler, which will perform the specified SQL instruction. Success messages are sent back to the controller, and the display archive watch orders will be populated on the supervisor profile as a graphical representation. So under the supervisor menu, we have archived watch orders, and here we will see all the watch orders which expiration date falls in the past or is before the current date. We can also click on the view details to view more fields. Here are only showing the relevant fields. After we click the view details, a pop-up window is shown and we can see more relevant details about that watch order. The supervisor at this point cannot modify any of the fields. User story 311, set watch order map default position based on longitude and latitude from site settings. So the sequence diagram for this story will start with the administrator by clicking the site settings menu. He or she can insert the desired latitude and longitude, and the admin controller will send the request to the data service, which will communicate with the DB handler with the two parameters that it needs, and it will perform the necessary update in the database. At the end of the transaction, we'll see that the display latitude and longitude will be provided to the admin profile for the user to see the new data that they just input. The visual representation: administrator will go under the site settings. There is a latitude and longitude fields for them to update. And after the information has been entered, it will be displayed under the current site settings section. So we can see that after the latitude and longitude has been set, once the officers will navigate to the watch order map, the map will be centered to the provided latitude and longitude. This way, if any other police departments will use the system in the future, they could set the center of the map to the latitude and longitude that they desire, which best suits their case. Some of the test suits and test cases for this implementation was for user story 332, add shift functionality for officers, use case 1. So the purpose is to verify a no shift is added to the database when user attempts to create it using the user interface. So the user must be logged in into the system, and the user must be in the shift management page. So the user enters the shift information, which is shift name, from, to, and status, and the user clicks the add shift button. The expected output of this test is that a no shift is created in the database and automatically displayed in the edit shift section. And we can see that after executing this test, the no shift was successfully saved in the database and populated in the edit shift section in the shift management page. So the status of this test case was passed. For test case number 2 is to add shift functionality for officers, and in this case we are trying to validate bad inputs. So the purpose of this test is to verify a no shift cannot be added without specifying the shift name, from, to, or status field. Again, the preconditions is that the user is logged in and the user is on the shift management page. The input, the user enters the shift information, shift name, from, to, status, and the user clicks to the add shift button. So the expected output is if the user leaves any of the input fields empty, a message should be displayed advising shift wasn't added. The actual output of this test was a warning message was displayed to the user when one of the fields was not populated, and the warning message was shift was not created in the database, and the status was also passed. As a summary, after this implementations in the version number 4, we have enhanced the view document feature by creating a visibility layer based on the officer shift. We have improved the system security by enforcing session timeout. We also added flexibility to control system settings like map position and timeout period. And we also provided more flexibility to supervisors for their reportings. Some of the tools we used was Angular, CSS, JavaScript, Bootstrap, and HTML. We have the Google APIs, PHP, MySQL database, and we use GitHub for version control. This was Darilys, and thank you so much for watching.